Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Marks, and I'm the director of Garden for the Environment, which is San Francisco's public teaching garden. And normally we are outside in the garden teaching in a variety of different ways. We are leading volunteer hours, teaching workshops, leading field trips, and obviously we can't be doing this right now because we are all honoring the shelter-in-place order that has come through the Bay Area and a lot of other parts of the country. And so we're moving our teaching content online. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about what to do in your garden this spring. And since we're all spending a whole lot of time at home, you might have a renewed interest in your garden or your deck or growing your own food, particularly because we don't know how long we're going to be sheltered in place for. And so we asked all of you to submit your gardening questions, and I won't be able to answer all of them today. This is a really big topic, but I chose some that seem like they follow a really general theme. And then we will also, some of the questions that you submitted gave us really good ideas for future content. So since we can't be in the garden teaching, we're actually moving our garden education online in a whole bunch of different ways. So we're upping our use of social media, so you can find us every day posting on a new topic. And we will also be updating our blog, which is called Growing Gardeners at gardenfortheenvironment.org. So some of the questions that I couldn't cover today, I think would be really good future topics. So what we are going to talk about today is sort of some general gardening topics that have come up, as well as things to be thinking about in your vegetable garden and in your perennial spaces. And perennial spaces being those spaces that have shrubs or trees, your flowering garden, sort of your plants that will stay in the ground for long periods of time and add beauty and habitat to pollinators and things like that in your garden. So things that we're going to be talking about overall. Right now is the biggest growing season for your plants. So springtime is obviously, you're seeing a lot of flowers on the trees, you're seeing a lot of new growth on trees and plants, and that's because the days are getting longer, the weather is warming up, the soil is warming up, and plants are vigorously growing, which means they're using a lot of water and a lot of fertilizer to do that. And by fertilizer, I mean food that's in the soil in the form of organic material or food that you feed your soil. So this is the big growing time, which means your plants are eating and drinking a lot. Think of your plants as like teenagers right now. And so the best thing that we can be doing for both our vegetable spaces and our perennial spaces is making sure that they are well fed. Luckily here in the Bay Area, we've been getting perfect spring rainy weather, which is not a deluge of rain that overwhelms our soil, but it's the slow, steady rain that allows the soil to absorb every drop like a sponge and hold on to it, because we're going to have some dry months ahead. And all of the water that is now coming into the soil through rain is actually going to come in handy in September when it gets really, really dry. So keep an eye on your plants. Your perennial spaces are probably getting a good amount of water right now, but if it does get dry for 10 days or so, you're going to want to make sure that those spaces get deep watering infrequently, every 10 to 14 days. And you also want to make sure that all of your vegetable areas and your perennial spaces are getting enough food. So if you're planting vegetables, this is the best time to be adding compost to your soil or an organic vegetable food like the EB Stone general tomato and vegetable food. And in your perennial space is a really good time to add things like unsifted compost or a nice top dressing, because that will act as a sort of like buffer between the sun and the elements in your soil, and also be adding nutrients to the soil. So as it rains, your plants are getting fed, and then they can grow big and strong because they're growing probably the fastest now that they will grow all year. So the other thing that this time of year is really good for is planning. And we're going to plan our vegetable spaces and our perennial spaces slightly differently. So someone asked me about miner's lettuce, which is a native plant that grows commonly here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and was wondering how to get some. Typically, when you see a plant like this growing and it's at the stage where you're going to eat it, or if it's like a California poppy, it's at the stage where it's blooming. That means that the plant was actually seeded months before. So every fall you see beautiful pumpkins in people's backyards and you want a pumpkin. Well, the pumpkin was actually planted back in July. So this is a really good thing for you to note if you keep a journal or a calendar, that next fall you actually want to be seeding things like miner's lettuce or California poppies or borage or something like that, so that when spring comes, it'll come up in your garden. Often when you're seeing something at its fullest, tomato fruiting or poppies blooming, it's too late to actually plant it. So that's just something to keep in your mind as you're planning. And planning is a really important part of gardening. And the more you can plan and sort of count backwards, so I want this to fruit or bloom at this point, which means I have to plant it however many months or weeks back, is a really good thing to do. So in your vegetable garden right now, there's two things you can be doing. You can be thinking towards your summer garden, summer here in the Bay Area, which is our dry, cool season, and what you can be growing now. So things, if you're interested in maybe starting seeds inside, would be things for your summer garden. And if you're in another part of the country, you can probably plant, or a warmer part of the Bay Area, you can probably think about tomatoes or peppers or eggplant. Here, our really stable summer crops are beans, bush and pole beans, things like a snapping green bean or a purple green bean. Summer squash, like a zucchini or something along those lines, a yellow crookneck squash. And peppers, things like shiso peppers, the little small peppers actually do pretty well here in San Francisco. So now is a perfect time to actually get those started from seed, because you're going to want to plant those out in early to mid-May. So kind of thinking back to the last point I made about planning, now is the time to start that. But there are a lot of things you can actually grow right now and plant right now. Carrots, beets, radishes, all sorts of leafy greens, everything from broccoli to chard to kale to lettuce. All of those things can be planted now. You can either start them from seed, which is really great because you could potentially order seeds online if you're unable to get out to the store, or a lot of local nurseries are open, particularly food producing ones, because it's considered a necessary business. So if you wanted to get seeds or starts there. The main difference is that starts are just faster along in the process, so you're going to have your food more quickly. So the lettuce has already grown for a number of weeks before you've bought it, which means when you plant it, you'll be eating a salad that much quicker. Someone asked me about a simple herb garden, which is the perfect thing to do, especially if you don't have a lot of space or you just want to start with something simple. So you just want to find a really nice porous pot, and by porous, I mean something that drains water easily and air can move through easily. So just a terracotta pot, an old wine barrel, something like that. And you'd want to use potting soil. Someone asked me about soil. So things like potting soil are really porous. They have coconut coir or vermiculite and perlite or some combination of all of those things. And that means that the soil stays airy, which means that water can move through it easily. And that means that roots can move through it easily. And that allows plants to not have to work so hard while they're growing. It allows the roots to move really easily and the water to reach everything, and they can grow big and strong pretty quickly. So I would recommend getting something like that. And some really good herbs that you can grow here in San Francisco, I would really recommend thyme, sage, and chives. Those are 3 really good ones. But with anything related to your vegetable garden, you want to grow things that you will eat. So if you don't like sage or you never cook with it, I would not recommend growing it. And it seems like an intuitive point, but so many people grow things because it's fun or it's an easy crop to grow, but they don't actually eat it, which is really challenging because then you just have a lot of sage on your hands with nothing to do. And someone asked me about watering vegetable beds. So it's a really hard thing to generalize because soil is different. Some soil, water moves through really easily and dries out very quickly. If you have a pot that's this big, it's going to need to get watered more because the air will wick that water out and the soil will dry out more quickly. Versus if you're growing something in the ground where there's a lot of other soil around it to sort of like insulate it, it's going to dry out less quickly. Generally, we water our vegetables almost every day of the week for a relatively short amount of time, 5 minutes on a drip system. So if you're watering yourself, the main thing to look at is your soil. Put your finger down a few inches deep. See if the soil has dried out. If you have a potted area, notice, is the soil starting to come away from the edges of the pot? Does it look dried out? When you touch it, is it dry and have a crusty top? You just want to make sure that the vegetables are getting consistent moisture, so they're never totally drying out, because that will stress them out. To dry out, they think that they're not going to have future water and they'll panic. And then they won't grow steady, delicious, succulent food for you to eat. So those are my main veggie tips right now. And then I'll move on to perennial spaces. So perennial spaces are really important for a garden because they provide year-round beauty, they provide habitat, they help with your soil health, they sequester carbon, which is important for climate change. There's a whole bunch of reasons that you would want to have a perennial space. Plus, it's really beautiful for you to look at. So one advantage to being home all the time is that you're looking at your garden all the time. And this is something that you should really use to your advantage. So if you have the opportunity to set your work from home station near to your garden, that would be the best, because you can kind of check on it all day. Where is the sun? Is there one, bird that's just terrorizing this one part of your garden and ripping everything out? Is it, somehow where your neighbor's dog can dig under the fence? Pay attention to what's happening in your garden. Right now, as I mentioned, is the biggest growing time for all of our plants, but it's not the best planting time. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, in San Francisco, we're about to have a long dry season, which is when it barely rains between May and October. So we don't want to plant our plants now because they might get stressed when there's no rain to come. So we actually recommend using this time to plan. And a well-planned garden space is going to do a lot better. If you plant things, and we have this saying here at GFE, right plant, right place. If you plant something that is going to thrive in a particular space, you need to do a whole lot less work. You're going to have a lot less pest problems, and you're going to have a whole lot less other problems. So if your plant is the right size, it has the right conditions in the place that you've planted it, if it's meant to thrive there, and there is a plant to thrive in every location, trust me, then you're going to have a lot more successful garden. So now is the time to dream. What do you want your space to look like next year? If you were looking out your window, what would it have? What colors, what flowers, what leaf, shape and texture? And start thinking about it. So now is the time to research and to plan, because the planting season here in the San Francisco Bay Area starts right around Halloween and ends usually about mid-February. So this gives you plenty of time to think about what is that space going to look like, and spend actually some time thinking through that and doing your research. So plan. So I don't want to talk for too long. And I'm also going to write all of this up into a blog post for today, so I'll have a lot of information. But there's a couple topics that we couldn't cover today that I think are going to make good future topics if you want to hear about them. Someone had a question about compost. Compost is this whole other thing. Compost we are so passionate about that I couldn't talk about it today, but I'm super happy to do either another video post or another blog post about your compost questions. Everyone should be composting right now. Someone asked about fava beans, which are such an important and wonderful crop, and they're so good to do with kids. And we're thinking about a lot of activities to do with kids. I'm home with my kid all day trying to work, and I know a lot of other people are too. So we're actually gonna do a whole topic on fava beans. And someone asked me a pest question, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I think I'll be covering pests on a different day. So if you have other questions about gardening, we are here to answer them. There's 3 of us that are garden educators working through this time and trying to put out content that'll be helpful and useful to you. So you can send us a direct message, and you can visit our blog at